You grow up believing in rules. Your father was a cop, your mother a nurse. Your house had the kind of quiet discipline that makes a kid believe the world has structure. Bad guys get caught, good guys do their job. The system works if people are brave enough to enforce it. At 27, you join the FBI, not for glory, not for politics. You join because you believe someone has to hold the line when the world tries to push past it. For 3 years, you work organized crime, surveillance, wiretap analysis, long nights staring at spreadsheets of shell companies and phone numbers. The mafia you're tracking is the largest criminal structure in the country. Old families, construction rackets, unions, shipping ports, casinos, trucking routes. It's not just crime, it's infrastructure. The Bureau has tried everything. Witness protection deals, financial crimes cases, drug seizures, indictments. Every time they get close, something collapses. Witnesses disappear. Jurors get scared. Evidence dries up. The mafia isn't just powerful. It's patient. Then one day your supervisor calls you into a meeting room with no windows. Inside are three people you've never seen before. Counterintelligence, organized crime command, undercover operations. The question they ask is simple. Would you be willing to disappear? You think it's a metaphor. It isn't. They explain the operation slowly, carefully. They need someone inside the organization. Not as a short-term undercover asset, not a quick infiltration. A life, someone who can live as a criminal long enough to climb. Someone who can become trusted. Someone who can get close enough to the leadership that when the Bureau finally moves, the entire structure collapses in one operation. You understand what that means immediately. Years, maybe a decade. You won't be able to call your family. You won't be able to tell friends where you went. You will disappear into a criminal identity that has to survive constant scrutiny. And if you're exposed, the Bureau cannot intervene. Your supervisor says it plainly. If they find out who you are, you won't make it out. You ask one question. How deep do you want me to go? The answer is quiet, as deep as it takes. The next 12 months erase your old life. Your name changes. Your fingerprints appear in fabricated arrest reports. Your financial history is rebuilt with fake tax filings, fake debts, fake employment records, and shady businesses that don't exist anymore. You learn how criminals talk, not movie criminals. Real ones. Short sentences, few words, no explanations. No emotional reactions when something violent happens. You learn street habits. How to scan rooms. Where to sit in restaurants. When to keep your hands visible. When to leave a conversation before someone starts asking questions. They even teach you how to lose fights without looking weak. Because criminals test each other. Your new identity is a small-time hustler from another state. A man who ran low-level scams and small drug distribution before drifting into debt and trouble. Someone desperate enough to work for anyone with power. When the training is finished, they hand you a final envelope. Inside is the name you'll use for the next chapter of your life. And the number of the only person in the Bureau who will ever speak to you again. Your handler. You memorize the number, then you burn the envelope. The city where the mafia lives doesn't look like a battlefield. It looks normal. Restaurants full of families, construction cranes rising over downtown, nightclubs where young people line up outside in expensive clothes. But under the surface, there's a second system running. Garbage routes controlled by extortion, construction contracts decided by threats, shipping containers that move through ports without inspection. You start where every outsider starts, the bottom. A small crew that runs gambling rooms and debt collection for one of the organization's mid-level captains. You introduce yourself through a contact the Bureau arranged months earlier. A bookmaker who owes favors to someone connected to the family. They give you simple work, driving envelopes across the city, standing outside poker games to make sure no one cheats, collecting small debts from gamblers who lost more than they can pay. You never ask questions. That's the first rule. Curiosity gets people killed in this world. Weeks turn into months. You build a reputation the only way that matters to them. Reliability. You show up early, you finish jobs, you never talk too much. The captain begins to notice you. His name is Marco Bellini, second-generation mafia, grew up inside the life, smart enough to understand business, violent enough that nobody tests him. One night, he invites you to sit at his table after a card game. He studies you for a long time before speaking. You don't talk much. You shrug. Talking gets people in trouble. He smiles slightly. That's true. After that night, your responsibilities change. You stop running errands. You start sitting in meetings. You hear conversations about construction, kickbacks, trucking unions, port inspections. You watch how decisions are made. The mafia isn't chaos. It's structured, hierarchies, permissions, territories, rules older than most corporations. You begin feeding information to your handler through coded phone calls once a month. Never enough to expose yourself, just enough to prove you're still alive. Years pass, and something strange happens. The more time you spend inside the organization, the harder it becomes to remember what your old life felt like. These men start trusting you. They invite you to weddings, family dinners, baptisms for their children. They laugh with you. They protect you when fights break out in bars. One night, Marco tells you something while the two of you stand on a rooftop overlooking the city. You know why this thing survives? He asks. You shake your head. Because we take care of our own. He gestures to the streets below. Out there, everyone pretends loyalty exists. In here, it's real. You don't answer because part of you knows he isn't lying. And that realization scares you more than any gun. 5 years into the operation, the boss of the organization notices you. His name is Lorenzo Ricci, a man who built power quietly. No headlines, no flashy violence, just decades of careful alliances and business deals. He calls you into a private meeting one evening. There are no witnesses, just the two of you in a quiet office above a restaurant the family owns. Ricci studies you for a long time before speaking. Marco tells me you're dependable. You nod once. I do my job. Ricci leans back in his chair. That's rare. Then he slides a file across the desk. Inside are photographs of a man, a contractor who skimmed money from a construction deal controlled by the family. Ricci looks directly at you. People make mistakes, he says. But betrayal has consequences. He taps the photographs. I want you to handle this. You understand immediately what he's asking. This isn't debt collection. This is an execution. For years, you've watched violence from the edges. Fights, threats, broken bones, but this moment is different. This is the point where your two identities collide. FBI agent, Mafia soldier. Ricci doesn't raise his voice. He just asks the question. Are you loyal to this family? And for the first time in the entire operation, you hesitate because if you refuse, your cover dies instantly. But if you accept, you may never be able to come back from what happens next. You walk out of the office that night knowing one thing. The mission was never about infiltrating the mafia. It was about surviving long enough inside it to destroy it from the center. And the closer you get to the top, the harder it becomes to remember which side you're still fighting for. You leave Ricci's office with the photographs in your pocket. The man in the pictures is named Daniel Costa, 42 years old, contractor, married, 2 children. You know this because you looked him up before the meeting ended. Your FBI instincts are automatic. They catalog everything. Address, family, business partners, phone numbers, but none of that matters to the mafia. To them, Daniel Costa is a liability, and liabilities get removed. You drive through the city for an hour before pulling into an empty parking lot near the river. Your hands are still on the steering wheel when your phone vibrates. 1 call per month. That's the rule. But tonight your handler breaks it. You answer. Neither of you says hello. You met Ricci, your handler says. Yes. And you stare at the photographs again. He gave me a job. A pause. What kind? You take a breath. The kind that proves loyalty. The silence on the other end lasts a long time. Finally, your handler speaks. If you refuse, they'll know. You already know that. And if I do it, you ask. Another pause. We get closer. You hang up. No instructions. No guidance. The Bureau can't tell you what to do here. Because if they do, they become responsible for the decision. So the choice becomes yours. You spend the next 3 days watching Daniel Costa. You follow him to construction sites, to restaurants, to his house in the suburbs where his kids ride bicycles in the driveway. You tell yourself you're studying him. In reality, you're delaying the moment where you have to decide who you are. On the 4th night, Costa stays late at one of his warehouses. Everyone else leaves around midnight. You sit in your car across the street. The gun Ricci gave you rests in the passenger seat. 10 minutes pass, then 20. Your FBI training runs through every possible outcome. If you pull the trigger, your cover survives. The Bureau gets closer to dismantling the entire organization. If you don't, you disappear. Your body ends up somewhere no one will ever find. But there's another outcome you didn't expect. If you do this, you cross a line that never uncrosses. At 12:43 in the morning, Daniel Costa walks out of the warehouse and lights a cigarette. You step out of the car. He sees you and frowns slightly. You with the night crew? He asks. You shake your head. No. For a moment, he studies your face. And then something changes in his expression. Maybe instinct. Maybe fear. Look, he says quickly, if this is about the money, I can fix it. You don't let him finish. The shot echoes across the empty industrial street. Costa collapses before the cigarette hits the ground. You stand there for several seconds, staring at what you've done. Then you walk back to the car. The next morning, Ricci calls you to the restaurant. He doesn't ask questions. He already knows. When you enter the office, Marco Bellini is standing beside him. Ricci nods once. Sit, you do. Ricci folds his hands on the desk. In this life, he says calmly, people talk about loyalty. He leans forward slightly. But loyalty isn't words. He gestures toward you. It's action. Marco pours 3 glasses of wine and hands one to you. Ricci raises his glass. To family. You drink. And in that moment, something shifts. The door you crossed the night before doesn't open again. From that day forward, you are no longer an outsider. You are part of the organization. 2 years pass. You rise quickly. Ricci begins trusting you with larger operations, shipping routes, construction contracts, cash movement through offshore accounts. Your handler still calls once a month. Each time the conversations grow shorter. Because the closer you get to Ricci, the less risk you can take. Eventually you become one of the boss's most trusted men. That's when the bureau moves. It happens at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday. Federal agents storm restaurants, warehouses, construction offices, and port facilities across the entire city. Simultaneous raids, hundreds of arrests, financial accounts frozen. For the first time in decades, the entire organization is exposed at once. For a moment, neither of you says anything. Then he nods once, not angry, not surprised, just understanding. You were good, he says quietly. The agents pull him away in handcuffs. Marco Bellini is arrested 2 houses down. By the end of the day, more than 60 members of the organization are in federal custody, the largest mafia prosecution in the country's history. Months later, you sit in a courtroom watching the trial. Your testimony lasts 6 days. Every detail you memorized over 7 years becomes evidence. Every meeting, every payment, every order. When the verdicts come in, the courtroom is silent. Guilty. On every count. Ricci receives life in prison. Marco Bellini receives 35 years. The organization collapses within months. When it's finally over, the Bureau offers you something simple. A new identity, a quiet life somewhere no one knows your name. You accept. Years later, you sometimes walk through cities where construction cranes rise over new buildings and restaurants are full of people laughing. Normal life. Order. You watch it quietly because you know how thin the line is between this world and the one you left behind. And sometimes you wonder something you never say out loud. Whether destroying the Mafia was the hardest part of the mission or becoming the man who could do it.